Hello, Treasures. My name is Julian Gonzalez Salamanca, Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I will deliver a quick message before Convocation begins. Last week, I sent an email to all students requesting for your important opinion regarding the LGBTQIA+ campus climate at Bethel College. If you haven't had a chance to respond to the survey, I will encourage you to do it. Also, we are giving away Amazon and Mojo's gift cards. All you have to do is include your email in the survey so we can enter your name in the raffle. Thank you for your support. Your opinion is very important for us. If you have any questions or comments about the survey, please send us an email at diversity@bethelks.edu. Again, it is diversity@bethelks.edu. Thank you.
Hello, I'm here with Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, and we're doing a follow-up question and answer to her convocation that she gave on Monday. What time is it? And I have a few questions from students. And the first question asks, why do you think there was a decrease in votes for Trump among white Catholics?
Well, before I jump into that question, I just want to say how glad I am to be with you in conversation on the other side. Well, not the complete other side, but a big leap forward in the process of this presidential election. And I have to say that recording my lecture to you last week, you could probably hear in my voice and in my words a sense of apprehension and not knowing. We still have some of that, but I feel like we're moving forward and a lot more is being clarified for us. So I'm glad to be here on this Monday. First question, why did white Catholic vote for Trump go down? There are probably a number of reasons for that. It has to do with where that Catholic white vote was located. And it probably has a lot to do with the states where the Biden campaign was more aggressively campaigning in a white Catholic context. But I think that the most significant reason is that Joe Biden is only in the history of the United States second person to be president-elect who is Roman Catholic. And the sense of the depth of his faith, he's not just Roman Catholic in name, he actually is a very devout Catholic. And I think in the campaign, he was able to make very clear to everyone, but in particular, white Roman Catholics, the depth of that faith, even though on some certain policy issues, he landed in a place that is not typically associated with the white Catholic vote, like on reproductive choice and LGBTQI issues. But I think it was the depth and sincerity of his Roman Catholic faith that made that shift so significant.
The next question is, how do you work at evangelizing across dispositional divide to invite fellow Christians to a life of holistically following Jesus in its personal and social fullness?
Wow, that is a great question. And I so wish that I had a fast answer to that like I did to the first one. That is the quest of a lifetime, and it is the quest of your lifetime. If you are a Christian and you are awakened to and willing to face into the really enormous divide in this country between and within the Christian community. We know a lot about the nature of that divide. But there is, I think, great hope for Christians on the one side to be reaching out to and speaking to and being in conversation with Christians on the other side of that. I shouldn't even call it a divide. When it comes to the church, it feels sometimes more like a huge canyon, like I said in my reflections. And that's hard. I have often tried to reach out for conversations as a theologian with theologians who I know hold vastly different positions on issues and have failed to make that connection. I think that there's deep suspicion and fear that divides the Christian community. But I think it's important to remember that the two biggest issues that on the surface divide particularly white evangelical and conservative Christians from white liberal Christians is the issue of reproductive choice and LGBTQI issues. And it's important to know that those are relatively new issues. When you find yourself involved in one of these conversations, it feels like you're trying to break through centuries of belief systems. But as late as 1976, the Southern Baptist Convention was actually passing resolutions supporting abortion, particularly in early term situations. So it's a relatively new emerging issue in the evangelical community, and in the LGBTQI community. I mean, that has been an even more recent conversation, although the knowledge of the diversity of sexual orientation in the Christian community has long been known. None of the traditions, Roman Catholic or evangelical Christian or mainline Protestant traditions, had any position on this that was articulated in part of the faith tradition. So it's new, and that means that it also is something that was made up and also can be engaged and changed with compassion in those conversations. And I'm personally looking forward to those conversations.
Yeah. I think, and you've given us the tool of thinking of a, not in just a divide, but in dispositions, and thinking about that rich kind of tool that helps us think in a much more rich sense of what we're dealing with here. The next question is, how would you characterize the current civil religions of the United States?
The current civil religions, meaning the religion of sort of practicing being American as if it's a faith tradition.
Right.
You know, I think that divide there is also very deep. But the present form that it's taken is relatively new. So if you were to go back, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm just down the road from you all. I mentioned that earlier. If you go back, I know a lot about my own state history. If you go back to, let's say, the 1920s, all of the conservative evangelical churches, and particularly if you were a Baptist, you would have been a Democrat and you would have identified yourself quite openly as a socialist. In fact, in I think it's 1917, I might not get my numbers exactly right, 211 avowed socialists were elected by Baptists to state office. Now that just kind of blows your mind to hear that in this moment, in terms of you know, how we think about how these different views of the economy and of what it means to be America. And I think what we have witnessed in the past 4 years is, in terms of creating that even deeper divide, is in some ways anomalous, and has created an even deeper divide that is going to require, even though it is fairly recent, a lot of healing work on both sides.
Yes. How do you see the role of the church and society changing as the U.S. sees ongoing loosening of Christian identity similar to other Western cultures?
Well, so yes, we are seeing across all religious demographics a decline in participation in faith communities. One place that's not true is in the Latinx community, but across all other demographic divides, we see a decline in, quote, religiosity. But that said, compared to our closest allied friends in Europe, we are still a deeply religious nation. And the vast majority of people in this country still identify as religious. We are, I surmise, going to continue to see the decline of those numbers in people who affiliate with organized religion. But I also see in my students here at Union Theological Seminary who come from all different religious traditions, still predominantly Christian. But a larger and larger number of them are coming from backgrounds that have no religious affiliation. Their parents weren't religious, their grandparents weren't religious. And they're coming to a place like Union, which is a seminary, because they're still interested in the power of religion. But they have been, many of them, harmed by the church, and see the transformations that are happening in the church. Some positive, some not so positive. And they want to be a part of what I think of as an emerging religiosity in this country that's unlike anything we've seen before. And it's really you all that are going to make that new religiosity come alive and grow. And I find that very exciting.
Great. What will your next book or journal article be? What are you thinking about now? What are you working on?
It's precisely these questions. I am thinking a lot about how do we create places where liberal and conservative religious communities, particularly Christian communities, can find a place for conversation and connection. And there are many things that we share, even though that canyon seems deep and wide. I think on both sides, there's a deep commitment to building a world that is better for our children, for the generations to come. I think there's a shared commitment to loving our neighbor. But I think when it gets down to sort of talking about what loving your neighbor involves, that's where we tend to bump up against differences that we need to just sit with and soften and learn to move forward with. I have to say that I think the most difficult of those divides is still the unexamined, what I refer to as white supremacy, the unexamined legacy and intertwined nature of whiteness and white privilege with Christian identity, and particularly conservative Christian identity in this country. Until we can begin to untangle that and look at it, that divide is going to stand.
That's very important work. Yes, that's near and dear to my heart. The ability to listen deeply seems like a challenge due to fractured sources of news, social media, etc. How do you recommend finding and listening to opposing viewpoints?
Well, that's a big question, because we become so polarized that you can oftentimes find yourself creating a world around yourself where you don't ever interact with anyone who's different from you. I live in New York City. It was very hard during this past election to find a Republican to talk to be frank. But I also have a family home in the Catskills near a small town, Walton, which went almost 65% for Trump. And I do have connections there to people who don't share my own political orientation, who don't share the view of Christianity that is dear to me, and who, when we talk politics, we come out on very different sides. But what's important is that you pay attention to those places where that happens, and the building of friendships and the capacity to actually know one another as people and not just as ideological positions is an absolutely crucial starting point for those conversations, because we have to be trusting in one another. We have to actually have a sense of responsibility for one another before that conversation can take place in a healthy way. And I'm sure, I have to say this at the end, but I'm sure that a large number of Bethel College students are going to go home for Thanksgiving and going to have these conversations across the dinner table. It's not like you have to go out and find the people. They're often actually sitting in your own homes.
Yeah. As you reflect on the election results, do you feel hopeful?
I feel extremely hopeful, and I also feel a sense of hard work ahead. I'm very hopeful that the Biden-Harris ticket signals a new day in this country. And I use the word dispositional in my lecture. And I think if you look at the dispositions of the two campaigns and the dispositions of the two candidates, I mean, you couldn't get, even though they're both older white men, you couldn't get two more different dispositions. And I found the word from President-elect Biden about being the president for all Americans and that it's time to leave demonization behind. A source of enormous hope because these divisions end up harming all of us. And having a leader who can work across divides is very important. But I am cautious in my hope because this wasn't a huge blue wave. It wasn't the signal that there is like, a bright new day dawning in which everyone agrees on the path forward. 74 million people voted for Biden, but 70 voted for Trump. And this time, the vote for Trump was done with eyes wide open. So those 70 million voters knew exactly who they were voting for. And that is the work that needs to be done. And from my perspective, a lot of that work needs to be done in our churches.
Yes. Can you say more about the importance of the arts or imagination as we move forward as a country?
Well, yes. So I think, and this is why I love talking to college students, because the future that we need to create in this country that will carry us forward is something that I don't think we even fully comprehend at this moment. I don't think 100 years ago, our forebearers could have imagined that we would elect as a vice president Kamala Harris. And I don't think we even began to imagine the reality of climate change and what we need to do to stop killing our earth. I mean, these are just two things that weren't even, it wasn't that they were on the table and no one paid attention. They weren't even in the imaginations of people when they thought about what this nation was and what the challenges ahead. But now they are here before us, and there are so many possibilities about who we become as a nation and as a people that we have yet to imagine. And it's in the arts where we push the boundaries of what we know, because we touch those parts of us that aren't already all blocked up with truths. And we go into spaces where something new can happen because it hasn't been bounded yet. And that's why I think the arts are absolutely crucial to having a healthy democracy.
Great, good. You sort of answered this question already, but let's reframe it. How can Christians communicate better across dispositional divides? So here I am attending Mennonite church here near campus, and how do I reach out to other Christians whose dispositions are very much different than mine?
Yes, I mean, so I did talk about this a little bit earlier, but this is where imagination comes in. I don't think it's just a matter of going and knocking on the door across the street, a church across the street, and saying, okay, let's talk. I think it's finding constructive ways to partner. I always find in working in for instance, small towns, but also, I guess I should say it's true for New York, you can find a common project to work on, like the food pantry, or homelessness, or scholarships for college students. If you can find an issue where you come together and the best of you on both sides is present, that those are places that afford the opportunity for conversations that can be difficult if nothing is bringing you together except your differences. So it's a sort of combination of finding places that are real to connect and then using those as the foundation for that conversation.
Great. And that was our last question. Do you have any further words or charges to us as we go forward in our studies?
No, just keep going forward in your studies. I know it's a very difficult time to be a student in the United States. Amidst all the political turmoil, the reality of climate change, the harsh reality of, of police murder of Black men and women, and then this growing, still escalating pandemic that has taken far too many lives. All of that, because each one of them in their own right is frightening and is consuming and is in some sense a reality that you're forced to grapple with, even if you don't quite choose to, can sometimes make learning hard because they take so much of your energy. But if you can take that energy that this complex world we're living in generates in you, and rather than fighting it, just recognize it and bring it right into your textbooks and right into your classrooms and make it the topic and the subject and the drive of your learning, and make wrestling with those the cauldron within which your own disposition is formed. Then you have a chance to be one of those rare and wonderful generations that are remembered for decades and decades to come for the creative work that happened in the midst of very severe and serious conflict. So I have great hope for what you're going to do.
Great. Well, I appreciate the time and energy and care you've been able to spend with Bethel College this week, and wish you well in the future.
And I wish you all well too. Thank you so much.